Welcome back, friends. Tonight we're diving deep into 3 eerie tales that will make you question what lies just beneath the surface of reality. From a cursed forest in Louisiana to a haunted hospital room and a forgotten soldier's final plea, these stories are bound to send shivers down your spine. So if you're ready to uncover the dark secrets that others have left behind, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out the channel. The Curse of Eden Grove. My new job as a city planner brought me to Eden Grove, a small town in Louisiana bordered by a dense, wild forest that the locals called the Green. I'd been hired to draft plans for a new housing development right on the edge of it. The forest was old, almost primordial, and the people in town seemed oddly protective of it. Some even warned me to leave it untouched, saying the Green was alive and didn't take kindly to intruders. I dismissed their words as superstition. I'd seen my fair share of strange folklore in my line of work, old legends that townsfolk would tell with absolute conviction. But I was here for a job, and progress didn't stop for ghost stories. Still, I couldn't ignore the strange looks I got when I mentioned the development. Eden Grove was quiet, sleepy, and untouched by the rapid growth of the outside world. I got the sense that they wanted to keep it that way. As part of my project, I needed to explore the forest to map out potential clearing zones. That first morning, as I prepared to enter the Green, an older man approached me. His face was lined with age, his expression somber. "You're from the city," he said, his voice low. "You don't know what you're dealing with here. The Green doesn't like being disturbed." I tried to brush it off, but he gripped my arm, his fingers cold and strong. "This place has a spirit. It protects itself. If you walk in there, don't take anything, don't mark anything. And above all, if you hear whispers, don't listen." I thanked him politely, determined not to let local legends deter me. But as I stepped into the forest, his words lingered, haunting me in the shadows cast by the towering trees. The Green was unlike any forest I'd been in. The air was thick, heavy, and filled with the scent of moss and earth. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, casting everything in a dim, green-tinged light. As I walked, I felt a strange sensation, as though the trees were watching me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I pulled out my map, making notes on potential clearing spots. But every time I marked a location, I felt a chill, a prickle at the back of my neck, as though something was warning me to stop. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the eerie atmosphere. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper, a voice drifting through the trees, soft and lilting, almost musical. "Leave." I froze, heart pounding, straining to hear more. But the forest was silent, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I told myself it was just the wind, a trick of my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was aware. As I pressed on, the whispers grew louder, filling the air around me. Each word was soft, yet insistent, repeating over and over, echoing in my mind. "Leave. Go back. You don't belong here." I turned, convinced someone was following me, but there was no one there. Only the dense forest, silent and watchful. My hands began to shake, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't explain. I took a deep breath, determined to keep going, but the whispers only grew louder, filling my mind, drowning out my thoughts. Then I saw it, a small carved wooden figure lying at the base of a tree. It was a crude carving, old and worn, its eyes deep and hollow, its mouth twisted into a grimace. I knelt to examine it, feeling an inexplicable pull, as though the figure were calling to me. But as I reached out to touch it, the whispers changed, turning harsh and angry, filling the air with a sense of warning, of menace. "Don't touch." I jerked my hand back, heart racing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It felt like a warning, a message left by someone, or something, that wanted me gone. I stumbled back, deciding I'd had enough. As I turned to leave, I felt a presence behind me, close enough that I could feel its breath on my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only the trees, their branches twisted into shapes that looked almost human, almost alive. The whispers followed me as I hurried out of the forest, growing louder, more urgent, filling the air with a sense of anger, of betrayal. When I finally emerged from the green, I felt as though I'd escaped a trap, a snare that had been tightening around me. But as I walked back to my car, I noticed something strange. Leaves clinging to my clothes, small, twisted roots wrapped around my wrists, as if the forest had tried to hold me, to keep me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the twisted wooden figure, its hollow eyes watching me, judging me. I heard the whispers in my mind, echoing through the darkness, filling me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. The next morning I woke to find a small wooden figure on my nightstand, identical to the one I'd seen in the forest. My heart pounded as I picked it up, feeling the rough, worn wood beneath my fingers. I knew I hadn't taken it, hadn't brought anything back from the forest, but there it was, a reminder that the green hadn't forgotten me. The whispers followed me in the days that passed, growing louder, more insistent, filling my mind with warnings, with threats. I tried to ignore them, tried to continue with the project, but every time I looked at the plans, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, a voice in my ear whispering, warning. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I returned to the forest, clutching the figure, determined to return it, to make amends. As I stepped into the green, the whispers fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. I placed the figure at the base of a tree, feeling a strange sense of relief, of peace. But as I turned to leave, I heard a voice, clear and unmistakable, echoing through the forest. "You belong to us now." The ground shifted beneath me, roots winding around my ankles, pulling me down, deeper into the earth. I struggled, fought against the pull, but it was no use. The forest had claimed me, binding me to its roots, its soil, its whispers. Now I am part of the green, my voice joining the chorus that fills the air, warning those who dare to enter, those who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. And sometimes in the quiet of the night I hear footsteps in the forest, the sound of someone approaching, and I whisper, soft and insistent, a warning to those who would disturb the peace of the green. Leave or join us. The hallway of room 9. After a string of exhausting shifts at the hospital, I finally managed to grab a few hours of sleep one afternoon. I'd recently started working the night shift at Riverview Hospital in Cleveland, and while I'd expected some long hours, I hadn't anticipated the strange occurrences that seemed to haunt the place. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt like I was being watched, as if something lurked just beyond my reach, waiting for me to slip into sleep. That afternoon, as I dozed off in my small apartment, I found myself in a dream, only it felt too real to be a dream. I was standing in the hallway of the hospital, a dim, eerily quiet corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse and shift, and the air was cold, heavy, like the chill of a winter night. At the end of the hallway, there was a door labeled Room 9. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond it, almost inviting. I took a step forward, compelled to see what lay inside, but as I neared it, a voice called out behind me, low and hollow. "Don't go in. Room 9 isn't for you." I turned, but there was no one there, only the empty hallway and the faint hum of the hospital's lights. I looked back at the door, feeling the pull, the sense that something waited for me on the other side. The cold deepened as I reached for the handle, the door creaking open under my touch. Inside, the room was dark, barely illuminated by the faint glow from the hallway, and in the center of the room, a figure lay on a hospital bed, shrouded in shadows. I stepped closer, the air growing thick with a sense of dread, of something wrong, something unnatural. As I reached the foot of the bed, I saw it, a body, pale and lifeless, its face hidden beneath a thin sheet. I reached out, compelled to lift the sheet, but the moment my fingers brushed it, the figure's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist, its grip cold and unyielding. I gasped, trying to pull away, but it held me tight, a voice whispering in my ear, low and filled with malice. "This is your room. Room 9 waits for you." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as the dream lingered, vivid and unshakable. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, a manifestation of my exhaustion. But the feeling of that cold hand on my wrist stayed with me, its grip like a mark I couldn't wash away. The next night at work, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over me, a nagging feeling that something was watching, waiting. I avoided the 9th floor, even though I knew it was just an empty wing, used only for storage and seldom visited by staff. But as my shift dragged on, I felt an almost magnetic pull, a compulsion to go up there, to see if room 9 was real or just a figment of my imagination. At 3 a.m., when the hospital was at its quietest, I finally gave in. I took the elevator to the 9th floor, stepping out into the silent, dimly lit hallway. It looked exactly as it had in my dream. Long, desolate, with flickering lights that cast strange shadows along the walls. And there it was. Room 9. The door was closed, but as I approached, I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible light seeping through the crack at the bottom, as if something inside was waiting, watching. My heart pounded as I reached for the handle, my hand shaking as I turned it, the door creaking open, revealing the dark room beyond. Inside, the bed was empty, but I felt a presence, something cold and malevolent, lingering just out of sight. The air was thick, stifling, filling my lungs with a heavy metallic taste, like the scent of blood. I took a step back, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, but before I could leave, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the darkness. Panic gripped me as I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't budge, as if something on the other side was holding it closed. And then I heard it, the same voice from my dream, whispering in the dark, closer now, so close I could feel its breath on my skin. "Room 9 is waiting for you." I turned, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, and saw them. Figures, pale and shadowy, standing around the bed, their faces blank, eyes hollow, watching me in silence. I stumbled back, my hand finding the cold metal of the door, but it still wouldn't open. The figures drew closer, their presence filling the room with an unbearable weight, a suffocating silence. I closed my eyes, praying it would all just disappear, that I would wake up. But the whispering grew louder, filling my mind, echoing in my ears, a chant that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "This is your room, this is your place, room 9 has chosen you." I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in that darkness, surrounded by those silent, watchful figures. When I finally managed to pry the door open, I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air, the cold still clinging to my skin like a shadow. Back on the main floor, I asked a nurse about room 9, hoping she'd tell me it was just an unused storage space, an ordinary room in an ordinary hospital. But she looked at me, her face pale, eyes wide with something close to fear. "There is no room 9 on that floor," she whispered. "They sealed it off years ago after the incident." I pressed her for details, my heart pounding, but she shook her head, refusing to say more. All I got from her was a warning, a reminder to stay away from the 9th floor, from the room that didn't exist, the room that wasn't supposed to be there. I tried to go back to my routine to forget the nightmare, but the memories lingered, haunting me, each shift spent dreading the pull of that empty hallway, that forbidden room. And every night, as I closed my eyes, I'd see them, the shadowy figures, waiting in the darkness, watching, whispering. "Room 9 is waiting for you." Now, every time I walk past the elevator, I feel a cold breeze, a whisper in the air, like an invitation, a summons. And I know, deep down, that one day I'll answer, that I'll be drawn back to that dark hallway, to that room that doesn't exist, because room 9 hasn't forgotten me. It's only waiting for me to return. The Forgotten Soldier. I'd always been drawn to military history, a fascination born out of my grandfather's stories about World War II. He'd survived the Battle of the Bulge, but the memories haunted him until his last days. Maybe that's why I joined a local historical society dedicated to preserving the past. I spent countless hours combing through letters, artifacts, and diaries, trying to keep the memories of the soldiers alive. One rainy evening, I was organizing old records in the basement archives when I came across a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Its edges were tattered, and the initials TH were barely visible on the front. I flipped through the pages, quickly realizing it was the journal of a soldier named Thomas Hardy, who had fought in the Pacific during the war. But something about this journal was strange. The entries were erratic, with dates jumping around, sometimes months apart, other times in strange, looping patterns. The handwriting changed from neat, measured script to frantic scrawls. Despite the chaotic nature, I felt compelled to read it, and as I did, I found myself drawn into the mind of a man who was losing his grip on reality. The first entries were typical of a soldier's diary, accounts of daily routines, his comrades, and the oppressive heat. But after a few pages, the tone shifted. Hardy wrote of voices, whispers in the jungle that no one else could hear. He described seeing faces in the shadows, figures that lurked just out of reach. His words became frantic, pleading for some unseen force to let him rest. One entry in particular caught my attention. June 24th, 1944. I hear them every night now. They tell me their names, their ages. I see their faces in my dreams. I try to tell the others, but they say it's just nerves. But I know better. These men died here, and they want me to remember them. They want me to understand. The next page was blank, and the entries following were sparse, each filled with desperate pleas to escape the jungle and the endless horror. But as I turned the page, I realized that the last entry was written months later after the war had ended. December 2nd, 1945. I thought I could escape, but the faces followed me. I see them in every shadow, every corner. They won't let me forget. They won't let me move on. And I understand why now, because I did the same to them. I sat back, feeling a chill run down my spine. I'd read countless accounts of men haunted by war, but this was different. Hardy's words felt alive, as if they were meant for someone specific, someone like me. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept hearing faint whispers, barely audible voices that drifted just out of reach. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But as I left the building, the whispers grew louder, forming into words. Remember us. I froze, my breath hitching. The street was empty, the night silent, save for those ghostly voices. I walked faster, hoping to escape the sensation, but the voices followed, persistent, pleading. The next day, I returned to the archives to search for any other mention of Thomas Hardy. I scoured records, hoping to find closure to his story, but his name was conspicuously absent from most records. It was as if he'd been erased from history. There was no mention of his battalion, his service records, or any details about his life. It was as if he'd never existed. My search led me to an old photograph tucked away in the back of a file cabinet. It showed a group of soldiers in the jungle, their faces worn and exhausted, yet familiar. But one man in the photo caught my eye. His face was the same as one of the figures I'd glimpsed in my dreams the night before. I felt a chill wash over me as I realized that the man I was looking at was Thomas Hardy himself. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and defiance. And behind him, half hidden in the shadows, were faces. Faces I'd never seen before, yet somehow recognized. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the weight of those eyes on me. I drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by dreams of soldiers marching through endless jungles, their faces hollow and ghostly. In each dream, they looked at me with an expression that seemed to ask a single question. Why? Unable to sleep, I sat up, realizing I'd brought Hardy's journal home with me. I flipped through the pages, hoping to find something, anything that would explain the dreams. But the journal was blank, each page empty, the ink faded as if it had never been written. The next day, I returned to the archives, determined to find answers. As I entered the basement, I saw something impossible. A figure stood in the corner, shrouded in shadows, but unmistakably the same man from the photograph, Thomas Hardy. He looked at me, his gaze piercing, filled with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "You need to understand," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding. "Understand what?" "That we were all just like you, men who wanted to survive. But someone has to remember the forgotten." And with that, he vanished, leaving only the silence of the empty basement. I stood there, feeling the weight of his words, the knowledge that I'd been drawn into something far older and more haunting than I'd ever known. To this day, I still feel the weight of those eyes, the faces of soldiers who once lived, fought, and died, their memories echoing through time, haunting anyone who dares to listen. And now, I am one of them, the keeper of their stories, the voice of the forgotten, cursed to carry the burden of those lost to history. Thank you for joining us tonight in exploring these dark and twisted tales. As always, remember that some places, and some memories, are best left undisturbed. If you enjoyed these stories and want more spine-chilling content, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if a place tried to claim you as its own? Until next time, stay curious, but beware of where your curiosity may lead. See you in the shadows.